The CEO's eyes were closed, but she wasn't sleeping. Victoria Sterling had built $1 billion empire by watching people when they thought no one was looking.
Yes.
Tonight, alone in the glass tower that bore her company's name, she wanted to know what kind of man worked in the shadows of her success. The 53rd floor conference room overlooked the Hudson River. Manhattan's lights scattered like fallen stars across the water. Through the darkened window, she could see her own reflection, a woman in an expensive suit perfectly still breathing in controlled rhythm. Beyond her ghostly image, the Empire State Building pierced the night sky, a monument to ambition. She'd learned this trick from her father, the man who'd built Sterling Industries from nothing in the 1980s. True character only reveals itself when people think they're alone. In 60 seconds, this janitor will say something that unravels everything I understand about power protection and the promises we make to the dead. The soft squeak of cartwheels announced his arrival at 2:47 a.m., exactly on schedule. Victoria controlled her breathing, kept her face relaxed, her body still in the leather chair. Through the glass wall, she watched his reflection approach. He was tall, lean, with the kind of weathered hands that came from years of physical labor, dark hair that needed cutting, a faded Sterling Industries uniform with the logo peeling on the pocket. He pushed his cleaning cart with one hand, the other holding a spray bottle, movements economical, like someone who'd learned to navigate spaces without disturbing them. He paused outside the conference room, noticed her through the glass. Most people would move on, come back when the room was empty. That was the easy choice, avoid the complication of a sleeping executive. Instead, he carefully opened the door. The quiet click of the latch seemed loud in the silence. He entered slowly, trying not to wake her. Victoria tracked his approach through the window's reflection and the subtle awareness of his presence. He didn't start cleaning immediately. She heard him set down the spray bottle, heard the soft rustle of fabric. Then she felt it, the weight of something being draped gently across her shoulders. A jacket. Worn denim still warm from his body, smelling faintly of laundry detergent and honest work. What happened next, Victoria would remember for the rest of her life. His voice barely above a whisper, so quiet she almost missed it. "I'm sorry I couldn't keep her warm." A pause. His voice cracked. "But I can keep you warm, I promise. No one should be alone in the cold. Not again. Never again." The words hit her like a physical blow. There was something in his tone, not madness, not confusion, but grief, so deep and carefully controlled it had transformed into iron vow. He wasn't talking to her. He was talking to someone who wasn't there, someone he'd failed to protect. Victoria's carefully maintained composure nearly cracked. She wanted to open her eyes, demand an explanation, understand what tragedy had carved that kind of promise into a man's soul. But she held still, barely breathing. He moved away. She heard him cleaning the soft spray of solution, the gentle wipe of cloth on glass. He worked around her without making a sound, treating her presence with respect that felt almost protective. 15 minutes later, he was gone. The conference room gleamed. The jacket remained on her shoulders, still warm. Victoria sat up slowly, heart beating harder than during any hostile takeover negotiation. She pulled the jacket closer, feeling the worn fabric, the lingering warmth. In the pocket, she found a photograph, bent at the corners, edges soft from being carried. A woman with kind eyes, a little girl with ribbons in her hair, maybe 3 years old, both smiling at a beach, the Atlantic Ocean, judging by the rocky shore and lighthouse in the background. On the back, written in careful print, "Sarah and Grace, Old Orchard Beach, Maine, 2019. 5 years ago." Victoria stared at the photo, at the woman who was clearly gone, at the child who would be older now. Something shifted in her chest, uncomfortable and unfamiliar. She had built her empire on reading people, on understanding motivation. She understood greed. She understood ambition, fear, pride, the desperate hunger for success. But this quiet vow to a ghost, This promise to protect strangers from a cold he couldn't protect. Someone else from this she didn't understand at all. Victoria stood still, holding the jacket, and walked to the window. Below, the city sprawled in a carpet of lights. Millions of people living millions of stories she would never know. Somewhere down there, this janitor was heading home to his daughter, carrying the weight of a promise that seemed to govern his entire life. And up here in her glass tower, Victoria realized she'd just discovered something far more valuable than efficiency ratings or clean floors. She'd discovered someone who still believed in keeping promises. The next morning, Victoria called her head of security into her office at 8 a.m. sharp. Samuel Reeves arrived promptly, his expression already guarded, former NYPD detective 20 years on the force before joining Sterling's corporate security. He knew that tone in her voice, the one that meant something, had shifted in the careful equilibrium of her world. "Tell me about the night janitor." She didn't waste time with preamble. "Ethan Cooper." Samuel's eyebrows rose slightly. "The janitor. What about him?" "Everything. Where he came from, why he's here, what he was before this." "With respect, Ms. Sterling, he's just a night janitor. His background check through NYC Employment Services was clean. He does his job. That's all we need to know." Victoria leaned forward. "No, that's all we bothered to know. There's a difference." She watched Samuel process this, saw the moment he decided to take her seriously. He pulled out his phone, accessing files. "Ethan Cooper. Hired 8 months ago through the standard service company we contract with. Previous employment, let me see, construction work in Maine, Portland area. Some maintenance jobs after that. No college degree. References checked out. Lives in a rent-stabilized apartment in Astoria, Queens with his 6-year-old daughter. Single father. Wife deceased." "How did she die?" Samuel looked up, surprised by the question. "I don't have that information in the basic file. We don't typically—" "Then get it. I want to know everything. Ms. Sterling, I'm not sure this is—" "Samuel." Her voice carried the steel that had made her famous in boardrooms across 3 continents. "When I ask you to find something, I'm not requesting your opinion on whether it's relevant. I'm telling you to do it." "Yes, ma'am." After he left, Victoria sat alone in her office. The jacket was folded carefully on the chair beside her desk. She'd meant to return it immediately, summon him, hand it back with polite thanks, maintain proper distance between executive and employee. But something stopped her. The photograph in the pocket. The promise whispered in the dark. The question of what kind of man made a vow like that and actually meant it. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, no. Derek. Derek Wilson, her CFO, reminding her about the merger meeting at 10. The Titan acquisition was entering its final phase, a $3.2 billion deal that would double Sterling Industries' market share. She'd spent 18 months engineering this merger, had outmaneuvered 3 competitor bids, had negotiated terms that would make her board members weep with joy when the announcement went public next month. But as she gathered files and financial projections, she kept thinking about a janitor who noticed systems running in empty spaces. Samuel had mentioned it last week, almost dismissively. The night janitor had asked about mechanical room access logs, wanted to know why certain systems were running during off hours when the floors were supposed to be empty. Most CEOs would have dismissed it. Victoria had built her career on not dismissing anything. The merger meeting consumed 4 hours of her morning. 17 people crowded into the Sterling Tower boardroom, lawyers from Sullivan and Cromwell, accountants, analysts reviewing final documentation. Victoria presided with her usual precision, catching discrepancies. Others missed, pushing back on vague language, demanding clarity where competitors would accept ambiguity. Derek Wilson presented the financial projections. Wharton MBA, 20 years at Goldman Sachs before joining Sterling. Charming, competent, her trusted partner for 8 years. The PowerPoint slides glowed with optimistic revenue forecasts. "This Q3 forecast," Victoria said, her finger pausing on one number, 18% growth. What's the underlying data source? Derek's smile came easy practiced. Titan's been undervalued for years. Market correction is overdue. This is aggressive but defensible modeling. Defensible or hopeful? If we second-guess every assumption, we'll never close any deal. Sometimes you have to trust the analysis and move forward. He gestured at the assembled experts. We've vetted this exhaustively. 18 months of due diligence. Victoria's eyes lingered on the spreadsheet. Something felt off, but she couldn't identify what. Numbers that looked right but tasted wrong. Walk me through the risk assessment one more time. If Titan's growth doesn't materialize, Derek interrupted smoothly, then we course correct. But Victoria, we can't let paralysis kill opportunity. She let it go. Watched the meeting conclude, everyone congratulating themselves on impending success. As people filed out, Derek's phone rang. Not his usual iPhone, a second phone he pulled from his briefcase. He glanced at the screen, stepped into the hallway, took the call privately near the window overlooking Times Square, 42 stories below. Victoria noticed, but didn't comment. When he returned, she heard him mention casually to a colleague, "My portfolio manager in the Caymans, just timing the markets. Offshore investments. Nothing unusual for executives at this level. Still, that second phone." Derek caught her looking, offered another easy smile. "Sorry about that. Always something." "Always," Victoria agreed, but she filed the observation away the way she filed everything. Samuel returned to her office at noon with a tablet and a much thicker file than standard employment records should require. "You wanted to know about Ethan Cooper." Victoria gestured for him to continue. Samuel opened the tablet, pulled up documents. "This goes deeper than I expected." He showed her hospital records from Maine Medical Center in Portland. Construction accident 3 years ago. Ethan Cooper, age 31, foreman on a waterfront condo project. Fell 30 feet from scaffolding after a support plank gave way. Broke his back. 3 months of rehabilitation learning to walk again. He was checking a loose bolt, Samuel read from the incident report. Climbed up to tighten it himself. Witnesses say he'd just shouted a warning to the crew below when the plank failed. Victoria studied the medical records. Multiple surgeries, heavy pain medication, morphine drip for weeks. His wife died the same night he was admitted. Samuel pulled up another file. Police report from the Maine State Police. Sarah Cooper, age 29, single vehicle accident on Route 295 North near Yarmouth, hit black ice, crashed into a tree, died at the scene. She was driving to the hospital to see him. Weather conditions were terrible, winter storm roads hadn't been treated yet. Phone records show she tried calling him 3 times in the minutes before the crash. Victoria's chest tightened. He couldn't answer. He was unconscious from pain medication. Nurse had just administered his evening dose. The phone was on the bedside table, but he couldn't reach it. By the time they told him what happened, she'd been dead for 6 hours. Samuel showed her another document, funeral announcement from the Portland Press-Herald, memorial service at Evergreen Cemetery, Ethan Cooper wheelchair-bound holding the hand of a 3-year-old girl who clutched a stuffed bunny. Social services reports say he made a statement at the funeral. In front of everyone, promised his wife he'd never let anyone suffer alone if he could prevent it, that he'd pay attention when others looked away. Victoria thought about the whispered words in the conference room last night. "I'm sorry I couldn't keep her warm." "There's more," Samuel continued. After Sarah died, he lost their house. Medical bills from the accident funeral costs no income while he recovered. He and his daughter ended up in a homeless shelter in Boston. Pine Street shelter, to be specific. Stayed there 4 months. He pulled up intake forms, caseworker notes. The shelter director's report says he was concerning at first. Gave away his meals to people who looked hungry. Gave his coat to others who were cold. Like he was trying to destroy himself through self-sacrifice. What stopped him? His daughter, Grace. Samuel found the social services note. She told him that Mommy wouldn't want him to disappear too, that she needed him to stay. That promises meant staying alive to keep them. Victoria stared at the photograph she'd found in the jacket. The little girl's hand clasped tightly in her father's, like she was afraid he might vanish if she let go. He got work doing day labor in Boston, saved enough for a security deposit on an apartment in Queens, eventually got steady maintenance work in Brooklyn, then applied through the service company we contract with for janitorial positions. Samuel scrolled through references. Every supervisor says the same thing. Reliable, honest, notices details others miss. What kind of details? One reference from Turner Construction in Portland. The supervisor said Ethan once shut down an entire job site because he spotted a structural weakness no one else had seen. Cost the company 2 days of work, but they kept him on anyway because the investigation proved he was right. Probably saved lives. Victoria stood, walked to her window. Below, the city moved through its afternoon rhythms. Somewhere in that vast machinery of humanity, a man who'd lost everything had rebuilt himself around a promise. What made him start asking about power consumption here? She asked it. In this building, Samuel closed the tablet. No idea. But he asked security 3 separate times over the past month. Always the same question: why are systems running on floors 48 through 51 during overnight hours when the building should be mostly empty? Not suspicious about it. Just concerned. Concerned. In a building full of people paid to care about quarterly earnings and shareholder value, the janitor was concerned about systems running in empty spaces. Victoria made a decision. Schedule an inspection. Tonight. After hours. Floors 48 through 51. I want to know what's using that power. Ms. Sterling. Tonight, Samuel. He recognized the tone. Nodded. Left. Victoria returned to her desk, but the merger projections held no interest now. She kept thinking about a man who'd promised a ghost he'd pay attention when everyone else looked away, and wondered what he'd seen that no one else had bothered to notice. That night, Victoria staged another test. Same conference room, same carefully arranged posture of sleep, same time, 2:47 a.m. When Ethan arrived, she watched through barely closed eyelids as he paused outside the glass wall. His eyes narrowed slightly. Suspicious. Aware. He didn't immediately enter. Instead, he walked to the far window, the one overlooking the mechanical systems on the building's lower rooftop. Stood there for 30 seconds, staring down at something she couldn't see from her position. She heard him mutter to himself, voice so quiet she almost missed it. Third night this week. Same pattern. Either someone's here who shouldn't be or systems are running that shouldn't be. Either way, nobody's asking why. Then he turned, noticed her again, and approached with that same careful quietness. This time he draped a different jacket over her shoulders, a worn Columbia hoodie working-class brand, the kind you bought at outlet malls. Whispered, I know you're probably not cold, ma'am, but just in case you are, just in case you need someone to notice. I notice, I promise. He cleaned the room quickly but thoroughly, then left. Victoria sat up the moment the door closed, walked to the window where he'd stood, looked down. At first nothing seemed unusual. Clean lines of ventilation units, power distribution boxes, the standard infrastructure of a modern office building designed by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill back in 1998. But then she saw it, a faint shimmer in the air above one section, barely visible against the night sky and Manhattan's ambient light. Heat rising. Equipment that should have been in standby mode was working hard. Victoria pulled out her phone, called Samuel Reeves directly. I need the power usage reports for building mechanicals, everything from the past 6 months, Con Edison records and our internal building management system. It's almost 3 in the morning, Ms. Sterling. Then you have until 7 a.m. to get them to me. She heard him sigh, accepting the inevitable. What exactly am I looking for? Discrepancies. Usage that doesn't match occupancy patterns. Systems running when they shouldn't be. That's a pretty broad. The janitor noticed something, Samuel. I want to know what. Silence. Then, you're taking operational cues from the night cleaning staff now. I'm taking cues from someone who pays attention when everyone else is looking the other way. She kept her eyes on that heat shimmer. There's a difference. The reports arrived at 7 a.m., delivered by a bleary-eyed Samuel who'd clearly been up all night compiling data. Victoria spread them across her glass desk, the morning sun streaming through windows that overlooked Herald Square below. Color-coded spreadsheets from Con Edison, internal monitoring logs, occupancy schedules, renovation permits from the NYC Department of Buildings. At first, nothing looked unusual. Normal fluctuations, expected variance, the kind of minor discrepancies that existed in any large building. But then she found the pattern. Every Tuesday and Thursday night between midnight and 4 a.m. power usage on floors 48 through 51 spiked by nearly 30%. Not enough to trigger automatic alarms, not enough to seem suspicious if you weren't looking for it. But consistent, regular, deliberate. She cross-referenced with occupancy schedules. Those floors should have been empty during those hours. Minimal security sweeps. No authorized personnel. Cross-referenced with renovation permits. Floors 49 and 50 were under construction by Tishman. Yes, but the permits specified daytime work only. Minimal crew, all equipment secured by 6 p.m. per OSHA regulations. Floor 48 was auxiliary server space. Backup systems should have been running in minimal operation mode overnight. Floor 51 was mechanical and building systems, automated, no reason for power spikes. What would cause a 30% spike? She asked Samuel. He studied the graphs, frowning. Heavy processing, server loads, climate control for something temperature sensitive. I'd need to do a physical inspection to know for certain. Then Schedule 1, tonight. After hours. Victoria pulled up the building schematic on her iPad, traced the power grid, identified the auxiliary server room on 48, the construction zones on 49 and 50, the mechanical systems on 51. Somewhere in those 4 floors, something was happening that required serious power, something no one was supposed to know about. So, at 11 p.m., Victoria arrived at the 48th floor in clothes she hadn't worn in years. Dark Levi's jeans, black Patagonia sweater, Nike running shoes instead of heels. The first time anyone at Sterling Industries had seen her out of corporate armor. Samuel waited with 2 building engineers, Rachel Chen from MIT, Mike Torres with a CUNY engineering degree. Both looked nervous. Middle-of-the-night inspections ordered by the CEO weren't normal protocol. The elevator ride up was silent. Tense. Victoria checked the building schematic on her iPad one more time. The auxiliary server room should have been accessed 3 weeks ago for routine maintenance by ABC Building Services, their contracted vendor. Nothing since then, according to the electronic logs. But when Rachel opened the door, the temperature hit them like a wave. That's not normal. Rachel moved quickly to the monitoring stations. Room should be 68 degrees per ASHRAE standards. This is 82, maybe 85. Mike checked the server rack's HP Pro Liant equipment fans running hard indicator lights, blinking furiously. Someone's running distributed processing across multiple systems. Rachel typed rapidly on her Lenovo laptop, pulling up resource allocation data. Heavy computation. Modeling, maybe simulations. This isn't backup storage. This is active work. Victoria felt ice in her veins. What kind of work requires this much processing power? Based on the allocation patterns, financial modeling, projection analysis, maybe risk assessment algorithms. Rachel looked up, meeting Victoria's eyes. Whoever's doing this needs serious computing power but doesn't want it tracked through official IT requests. Samuel checked the access logs on his tablet. According to the system, nobody's been in this room for 3 weeks. Victoria's voice came out colder than she'd intended. Then someone bypassed security. Someone with technical knowledge and access privileges. Mike had moved to the back of the server room. Ms. Sterling, you need to see this. Behind one of the racks, a secondary door, unmarked on the building schematic. The lock mechanism was warm to the touch, the hinges recently oiled. Someone had been using this door, often, and they might still be in the building. They moved to floor 49 in silence. Weapons drawn, Samuel had called in 2 additional security officers, both armed. The construction zone looked normal at first. Tools secured in Milwaukee tool lockers, materials staged on pallets. Everything OSHA compliant exactly as it should be. But Rachel noticed the discrepancy. Construction crew should have sealed this section. Why is the plastic sheeting loose, behind a wall of plastic marked "Demolition, do not enter"? They found a narrow corridor, dusty, clearly unused by the legitimate construction crew. The corridor led to a small room hidden behind false drywall, 12 by 12, makeshift office, folding desk with dual Samsung monitors, mini fridge humming quietly stocked with Red Bull and lean cuisine meals, a cot with a Coleman sleeping bag, Keurig coffee maker surrounded by empty Monster Energy cans, and on the whiteboard financial formulas, scratch calculations, Bloomberg terminal login codes. Victoria's hands shook as she approached the desk. Samuel searched while Rachel booted up the computer. Dell XPS, no password required. Arrogance or haste. Victoria couldn't tell which. The files appeared on screen. Folder Titan Acquisition Master. Subfolder Official Projections. Locked. Password required. Subfolder Adjusted Models. Open. Victoria clicked through, her breath catching with each file. Altered Excel spreadsheets, modified revenue forecasts. The 18% growth that Derek had presented this morning she saw now. It should have been 12% in the original analysis. Risk assessments with red flags deleted, replaced with green approvals. Draft emails to vcapital@securemail.io. Vanguard Capital Partners, the Chicago-based competitor who'd tried to bid on Titan and lost. Internal memos, her own confidential strategy notes, board meeting minutes that should have been locked behind Sterling's Palo Alto Network's firewall. Samuel held up a manila folder, his voice tight. Ms. Sterling, this is fraud. Someone's systematically cooking the books on the Titan merger. Victoria stared at the monitors, her carefully constructed world fracturing. These files are behind triple-layer security. Whoever's doing this has C-suite access, not a rogue analyst, an executive. Mike Torres spoke quietly from the doorway. Should we call the NYPD Financial Crimes Unit? Not yet. Victoria's mind raced through possibilities, probabilities, implications. First, I want to know who. Samuel pulled up security footage on his tablet. The hidden office entrance was visible from one camera angle, barely but enough. The footage showed a man entering repeatedly over the past 6 months. Late nights. Weekends. Always alone. The timestamps matched the power consumption spikes exactly. Victoria recognized him immediately. Carter Hayes, head of financial operations, recruited from Morgan Stanley 5 years ago. Trusted executive. Someone she'd worked with on a dozen deals. Her hand trembled slightly as she steadied herself against the desk. Pull everything, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Every file, every communication. I want to know the full scope before we move. But she already knew this was bigger than one man. Bigger than one merger. Someone had been manipulating Sterling Industries from the inside, and they'd been doing it for months. Possibly years. Victoria returned to her office at 2 a.m. and made the call she'd been dreading. Derek Wilson answered on the third ring, his voice sleepy from his Upper West Side apartment. Victoria. It's 2 a.m. What's wrong? Carter Hayes has been manipulating the Titan merger. I have evidence, altered projections, communications with Vanguard Capital. We're killing the deal. Silence. Too long. Then Derek's carefully controlled response. Are you certain that's a serious accusation, Victoria? In the background, she heard it, faint but distinct, the sound of keys typing. I'm certain, she said, listening carefully now. I found his hidden office. The evidence is irrefutable. The board won't support this. You're talking about destroying a $3 billion deal based on documented fraud. They'll see the evidence in 4 hours. Emergency meeting at 6 a.m. Victoria, if you're wrong about this, if there's another explanation, I'm not wrong. I need you there, Derek. Sterling Tower, 6 a.m. Of course, I'll be there. He hung up. Victoria stood at her floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city that never slept. Below, she could just make out a small figure pushing a cleaning cart down West 42nd Street toward the Times Square subway station. Ethan Cooper, heading home to his daughter in Queens. The man who'd noticed systems running in empty spaces, who'd asked questions 3 times because he couldn't ignore what he saw. The man who'd saved her company and didn't even know it yet. Thank you, she whispered to the glass to the night, to promises kept by people the world had taught to be invisible. Thank you for noticing. But even as gratitude filled her chest, dread followed close behind. Because in his apartment overlooking Central Park West, Derek Wilson sat in darkness, the glow of his laptop illuminating his face. On the screen, Bank of Cayman Islands, account balance, $2,847.392. Below that, Vanguard payout schedule, pending merger completion, 3.2 mm transfer upon deal closure. Derek closed the laptop, opened a different phone, not his iPhone 15, but a burner he kept in his safe. Opened an encrypted messaging app, typed to contact labeled CH. She found the office. Emergency board meeting 6 a.m. Assume she has everything. What's the play? The response came within seconds. Buy me time. I'll clean up floor 51. Derek stared at the message, closed his eyes, opened them again, typed understood. Then he pulled USB drives from his safe drives labeled Floor 51 Backup and began planning how to destroy evidence before morning came. Because the conspiracy wasn't just Carter Hayes, it never had been. The emergency board meeting convened at 6 a.m. in the Sterling Tower boardroom, 17 exhausted faces dragged from sleep across Connecticut, Westchester, Long Island. Victoria stood at the head of the mahogany table, the projector screen behind her glowing with evidence that would either vindicate her judgment or end her career. She didn't waste time with preamble. We have a problem. Someone has been manipulating the Titan merger from the inside. The room erupted. Questions, denials, demands for proof. Victoria let them react. Then she presented everything. The hidden office behind construction plastic on floor 49. The altered documents, official projections showing 12% growth. Carter's modified versions claiming 18. Security footage showing 47 visits over 6 months, always late nights, always alone. The shell company payments, $847,000 from Strauss Consulting, LLC, a Delaware-registered entity that traced back to Vanguard Capital Partners in Chicago. Vanguard wanted us to overpay for Titan, Victoria explained, her voice steady despite the fury coiling in her chest. Once we weakened ourselves with an inflated acquisition, they'd launch a hostile takeover of Titan at a discounted price during the chaos. We'd be stuck with debt. They'd get the prize. Henry Morrison, the board chairman, leaned forward. 73 years old, silver-haired, Victoria's father's old friend from Columbia Business School in the 70s. His voice carried skepticism honed over 4 decades of corporate governance. How did you discover this, Victoria? Our internal audits from Deloitte found nothing. A janitor noticed systems running in empty spaces. He asked questions. I decided to investigate why. Silence. Stunned, disbelieving silence. A board member from Boston, Margaret Whitmore, owner of Whitmore Consulting LLC, a firm that profited handsomely from advisory fees tied to deal complexity, spoke with barely concealed contempt. A janitor? Yes. Victoria met her gaze without flinching. While we were focused on quarterly projections and Wall Street expectations, someone who actually works in this building every night noticed something wrong. And instead of dismissing it as not his concern, he kept asking. That's why we found this before the merger closed. Margaret shifted uncomfortably. Killing the merger would cost her firm hundreds of thousands in fees. The door opened. Security escorted Carter Hayes inside, flanked by Sterling Industries officers. He wasn't cuffed yet, technically, not under arrest, just detained for questioning. Carter's composure remained intact, that arrogant smirk Victoria had seen in 100 negotiations. Really, Victoria, conspiracy theories from the cleaning staff. This is how low we've sunk. Victoria projected the security footage on the screen. Carter entering the hidden office. Timestamps matching power consumption spikes exactly. Explain these 47 visits to an unauthorized workspace. Explain communications with Vanguard Capital. Explain payments from Strauss Consulting. The smirk faded slightly. Strauss hired me for legitimate advisory work. Consulting isn't illegal in New York State. It's illegal when you're feeding them confidential Sterling strategy documents in violation of your employment contract and SEC regulations. It's fraud when you're altering our merger projections to serve their hostile takeover plan. Carter's voice rose. You're destroying a $3 billion deal based on paranoia. The board won't support this madness. Henry Morrison's voice cut through the room like a blade. The board will support the truth, Mr. Hayes, even when it's expensive. Victoria felt something settle in her bones. Especially when it's expensive, because that's what integrity costs, the willingness to pay the price of honesty. Carter pointed at her desperation bleeding through his polished exterior. You have no idea what you're walking away from. Titan is worth the investment even with complications. Meaningless if it's built on fraud. Henry signaled security. Escort Mr. Hayes out. Our legal counsel from Sullivan and Cromwell will be in touch. As Carter was led away, still protesting about stock crashes and shareholder fury, Victoria caught Derek Wilson's expression in the back corner of the room. Carefully neutral. Too neutral. His face showed nothing, but his knuckles were white where he gripped his phone. Henry called the vote 30 minutes later. Kill the Titan merger. Full public disclosure of the fraud. Cooperation with FBI financial crimes investigators. Accept whatever consequences followed. Margaret Whitmore objected immediately. Shareholders will revolt. We're talking billions in market cap evaporation on NASDAQ. Then I lose my job. Victoria's voice didn't waver. But I won't build this company's future on lies. What about the 1,200 employees whose jobs depended on this merger's synergies? Another board member worried about layoffs. What about the thousands more who'd lose jobs when the fraud became public after the merger closed, when SEC regulators dismantled us for securities violations? Henry's voice carried finality. Short-term pain versus long-term destruction. I vote we kill the merger. Margaret's face hardened. And I vote we investigate further before making irreversible decisions. The vote split 10-7 in Victoria's favor. Henry's deciding ballot tipping the balance. Victoria ordered immediate action. Public announcement through Business Wire. Full disclosure. Cooperation with federal investigators from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Manhattan. As board members filed out arguing in clusters about the wisdom of her decision, Derek slipped away unnoticed. Camera footage would later show him heading toward the elevators, pulling out that second phone, the one that wasn't his iPhone. But Victoria didn't see it yet. She was too busy watching her company's stock price begin its free fall. By noon, the merger cancellation had gone public. Bloomberg terminals at the NASDAQ market site in Times Square flashed the news. Sterling Industries stock plummeted down 18% in the first hour. Victoria's phone exploded with calls. BlackRock Capital, Fidelity, T. Rowe Price, State Street, major institutional investors demanding explanations threatening emergency shareholder votes. At 1 p.m., CNBC anchors in their Englewood Cliffs studios debated whether this was bold leadership or catastrophic judgment. By 3 p.m., protesters gathered outside Sterling Tower on West 42nd Street. Shareholders holding hand-painted signs "Fire Victoria." The Wall Street Journal homepage, viewed on a laptop at a Starbucks near Rockefeller Center, ran the headline, "Sterling CEOs Gamble Integrity or Insanity." Victoria ignored it all, turned off her phone, grabbed her jacket. Time to find Ethan Cooper and say thank you. But her assistant intercepted her at the elevator. "Ms. Sterling, you need to know 3 major shareholders just filed an emergency motion with Delaware Chancery Court. They're demanding a special board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. to vote on removing you as CEO. The ground shifted beneath Victoria's feet. She'd known this was coming, had accepted the risk when she killed the merger. But knowing and experiencing were different things. "Tomorrow," she repeated. 9 a.m. "Yes, ma'am. Margaret Whitmore is leading the effort. She's already contacted CalPERS and TIAA pension funds, lobbying for your removal." Victoria stepped into the elevator, let the doors close. Alone in the descending car, she allowed herself 30 seconds of fear. Then she straightened her spine and went to find the man who'd saved her company. She found Ethan Cooper cleaning the executive bathroom on the 32nd floor at 11:30 p.m. He was scrubbing an American Standard sink, didn't hear her approach. When he saw her reflection in the mirror, he straightened immediately, nervous recognition crossing his weathered features. For the first time, he was seeing her as the CEO, not a sleeping figure in a conference room. Victoria held out his jackets, both professionally cleaned by Maurice Garment Care in Manhattan, carefully folded. "You left these with me. Twice." His face registered understanding, realization dawning slowly. "You were awake. Both times. I wasn't asleep either time. I was testing you." He absorbed this without visible anger. Just quiet assessment, like a man accustomed to being judged. "Testing me for what? To see who you are when you think nobody's watching. To understand what kind of person makes a promise like the one you made." Careful now. Guarded. "I don't know what you're talking about, ma'am." Victoria's voice gentled. "Yes, you do. I'm sorry I couldn't keep her warm. You promised someone you'd never let anyone be alone in the cold again." Silence stretched between them. His jaw tightened, grief and privacy warring with the exposure of having his deepest wound laid bare. "I found the photo in your jacket. Sarah and Grace, Old Orchard Beach, Maine, 2019. His voice came out rough. "You had no right to—" "You're right, I didn't." She met his eyes directly. "But I needed to understand why a janitor cared about power consumption in empty buildings. Why you kept asking questions nobody else thought to ask. And now you understand. Now I understand that you saved my company. Your questions exposed fraud that would have destroyed us." They stepped into the hallway for privacy. The window overlooked Times Square, neon bleeding colors across the night. Ethan told her about Sarah, not because he wanted to, but because the truth was already exposed and pretending otherwise served no purpose. Winter night 3 years ago. Him unconscious from morphine after the scaffolding accident at a Portland waterfront construction site. Sarah driving from their Cape Elizabeth home to visit him at Maine Medical Center. Black ice on Route 295 near the Yarmouth exit. The crash. Her dying alone in the cold while he slept through her final phone calls. Verizon records showed she called 3 times in those last minutes. I couldn't answer. I was pumped full of pain medication and she died alone. His voice didn't break. The grief had been forged into something harder than tears. I promised her at the funeral, at Evergreen Cemetery in Portland. Grace was only 3. Didn't understand why Mommy wasn't coming home. I promised Sarah in front of our daughter that I'd never let anyone suffer alone if I could prevent it, that I'd pay attention when others looked away. Victoria's throat tightened. You didn't fail her, Ethan. You were injured unconscious. I wasn't there when she needed me. He cut her off. So now I'm always there. I notice things. I ask questions. I care when it would be easier not to, because that promise is all I have left of her. They stood in silence. 2 people separated by wealth and position, connected by the recognition of what it meant to be haunted by the dead. Finally, Victoria spoke. I want to create a new position, Director of Internal Oversight. Someone whose job is to notice inconsistencies, ask uncomfortable questions, report directly to the board. No filtering through executive management. No career advancement tied to quarterly earnings. Just truth. Ethan's eyes narrowed. You want me to do this? I need someone who keeps promises, who notices things, who cares about people being left alone, whether in the cold or in the shadows of corporate corruption. Ms. Sterling, I'm a janitor. I don't have a business degree.
Hey, I don't have corporate experience.
I'm not asking you to be something you're not. Her voice carried conviction she hadn't felt in years. My daughter needs me home every morning. Grace goes to PS 234 in Queens. I can't abandon her for a career. Then we design the role around Grace. Morning hours, flexible schedule, remote work options, whatever ensures you're the father she needs. He studied her face, searching for the trap, the catch, the inevitable betrayal. If I take this, it can't be about titles or offices or becoming someone different. It has to be about making sure that caring about doing things right actually means something here. Can you promise that? Victoria thought about her father, about the company he'd built on integrity in the 1980s, about the compromises she'd made climbing to CEO. I can promise to try. I can promise I won't ask you to compromise what makes you who you are. The promise you made to Sarah that matters more than any corporate objective. And when I find things you don't want to know, when I ask questions that make you look bad, when I expose problems that would be easier to hide, then you'll be doing your job correctly, and I'll support you even when it costs me politically. Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded once. I need to think about it. Talk to Grace. Of course. They shook hands, an unlikely alliance forming in a 32nd floor hallway while the city glittered below. Victoria didn't know that in his office 12 floors above, Derek Wilson was already planning to destroy everything she'd just fought to protect. The next morning at 8 a.m., Derek stood in his Sterling Tower office staring at his laptop screen. The emergency board vote was scheduled for 9. Margaret Whitmore had done her work efficiently, calling board members, lobbying institutional investors, building momentum for Victoria's removal. Derek's phone buzzed. The burner. Carter's message, she's creating an oversight position, bringing in the janitor who found us, moving faster than expected. Derek typed back, how fast? Fast enough that we need final protocol. Tonight, floor 51, midnight. Derek stared at the message. Final protocol. They'd discussed it as contingency. Thermite charges from a supplier in New Jersey, small electrical fire in the mechanical room, destroy hard drives, erase server logs, make it look like equipment failure. The FDNY would handle cleanup. No one would suspect arson. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. 18 months ago at a Wharton reunion dinner, this had started with casual conversation. Adjusting projections. Strategic optimism. What everyone did on Wall Street. Now he was planning arson in Manhattan. Are you insane? He typed. We agreed to erase data, not burn the building. Carter's response came immediately. Small fire. Contained. Destroys evidence. This is the only way. Derek closed his eyes, thought about the Cayman Islands account, The $2 million in gambling debt, Atlantic City casinos, online poker, illegal bookies in Queens. The $3.2 million payout from Vanguard that would have cleared everything and left him with profit. All of it evaporating because a janitor had asked about power consumption. He typed, "Midnight. I'll handle building access." Then he sat alone in his office and rationalized what he'd just agreed to do. Not arson, evidence destruction. There was a difference. He'd keep telling himself that until he believed it. At 10:30 p.m., Victoria sat in Henry Morrison's private office at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, trying to shore up support before tomorrow's vote. Henry looked exhausted. 73 years of corporate warfare etched into the lines around his eyes. "Victoria, I voted for you because I believe you did the right thing. But Margaret Whitmore has convinced 3 other board members to flip. She's been very effective lobbying the pension funds. How close is tomorrow's vote? 9-8 in your favor, assuming no one else defects overnight." 1 vote. Her entire career balanced on a single board member's conscience. Henry's phone buzzed. Samuel Reeves calling. Henry put it on speaker. "What is it, Samuel?" "Fire alarm at Sterling Tower. Floor 51 mechanical room. Smoke reported. FDNY engine 54 is en route from the 8th Avenue firehouse." Victoria's blood turned to ice. "Floor 51. That's where we found Carter's evidence." Samuel's voice tightened. "Buildings evacuating per NYC fire code. But Ms. Sterling's security cameras show someone entered that area 20 minutes ago. The mechanical room is locked from the inside." She was already moving. "Someone's destroying evidence." Henry followed her. "Let the fire department. If someone's destroying evidence that proves the conspiracy goes deeper than Carter, I need to know who." They took a taxi to Sterling Tower, arriving to organized chaos. 3 fire trucks from FDNY Engine 54, Ladder 4, Battalion 9. 2 NYPD patrol cars from Midtown South Precinct. Evacuated employees clustering on West 42nd Street in various states of dress, some in pajamas, from the residential condos on floors 60 through 75. News vans already arriving. WABC Channel 7. WCBS Channel 2. The media smelled blood. Fire Chief Michael O'Brien, gruff 50s, 25 years with FDNY, blocked her path. "Building's not clear per NYC fire code. Smoke's contained, but we don't risk civilians. I'm the CEO, that's my building, my evidence being destroyed. And you'll be my liability if you get hurt. No civilians until we give all clear." A firefighter's radio crackled. "Chief, we've got the fire contained. Small electrical fire in a Siemens breaker panel deliberately set. And we've got a male subject inside, not responding to verbal commands. He's trying to access HP computer servers, smashing hard drives with a hammer." Chief O'Brien's expression hardened. "Can you identify him?" "Negative. Subject's wearing a 3M breathing mask and hood. Can't see his face." Victoria's voice cut through with desperate authority. "Get me up there. Now." "Ma'am, I can't." Henry stepped forward. "Chief, this is a federal fraud investigation. FBI and SEC are involved. That evidence is critical. She goes up, or we get the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York down here to override you." Chief O'Brien's jaw worked. Then he gestured sharply at his crew. "Fine. Full FDNY gear. You follow orders. One wrong move, we pull you out." They suited her up in borrowed Lion Apparel bunker coat, MSA, Cairns helmet, Scott air pack, breathing apparatus. The equipment was too large awkward on her frame. Her hands shook as she strapped it on. Henry tried to follow. She refused. One of us needs to survive to testify at Manhattan Federal Court. Then she followed the firefighters into the smoke. The mechanical room door on floor 51 gave way under hydraulic tools, the Hearst jaws of life crushing the lock mechanism with a sound like breaking bones. Smoke billowed out. Victoria's breathing apparatus fogged immediately. Through the clearing haze, she saw a figure hunched over an HP ProLiant server rack. The slow-motion sequence would replay in her mind for months afterward. The figure holding a Stanley Fat Max hammer, smashing hard drives, sparks flying from a damaged Siemens electrical panel, the source of the fire, turning toward the door, backlit by emergency lighting, pulling off the 3M breathing mask. Derek Wilson, soot-streaked face, expensive Brooks Brothers suit covered in ash, holding the hammer in one hand, a SanDisk USB drive in the other, eyes showing trapped animal desperation mixed with resignation. He saw Victoria. The hammer slipped from his fingers, clattering on concrete. "I told Carter this was a mistake." His voice came out hoarse from smoke. "I told him burning evidence would only make things worse. But he was convinced you'd find the connection to me, that you'd discover I knew about the altered projections all along." Victoria removed her helmet, stared at him through the smoke. "Derek." The name came out as a question, a plea, a denial of what her eyes were showing her. 8 years. 8 years of partnership, of trust, of building Sterling Industries together. "You knew." Her whisper carried more devastation than any scream. 8 years, Derek. You knew." His knees buckled. He dropped to the floor, the hammer rolling away. "I didn't just let it happen, Victoria." The confession poured out like poison finally lanced. "I helped design the scheme. The altered projections, the optimistic forecasts, the methodology Carter used, I created it all, back at Wharton. Learned it from derivatives trading at Goldman Sachs." His voice cracked. "I'm not his accomplice. I'm his partner." FDNY firefighters moved in, securing his hands with NYPD restraints. But Victoria couldn't look away from his face. Betrayal, fury, grief, emotions, cycling too fast to name. "Why?" The question came out broken. "Why betray me?" Derek laughed. Bitter. Hollow. And then a janitor asked about power consumption. A man with no MBA, no credentials from Wharton or Harvard, just eyes that actually saw. And everything unraveled because he couldn't rationalize inconsistencies like I'd learned to do at Goldman. He looked up at her, soot-streaked face, eyes red from smoke and something that might have been shame. "I convinced myself aggressive projections weren't fraud, just strategic optimism. What we learned in business school, what everyone does on Wall Street." "How many others?" Victoria's voice had gone cold, detached. "The only way to survive this." "How deep does this go?" 5 total. Derek's shoulders sagged. "Carter, Me Too, and accounting Angela Chen and Marcus Webb. They helped hide the Strauss consulting payments. Altered internal audit reports from Deloitte. And one at Titan Industries. Richard Moss, VP, in their Philadelphia headquarters. He fed us insider information." Samuel had arrived with NYPD officers. Victoria heard herself giving orders like someone else was speaking. "Arrest all of them. Tonight. Before they can destroy evidence or flee." Derek looked up at her. "Victoria, I'll cooperate. I'll give you everything. Wire transfers from the Caymans. Encrypted emails to Vanguard. Just, I need immunity. Protection from federal prosecution at SDNY. You're in no position to negotiate." But even as she said it, Derek was revealing more, the words tumbling out in desperate confession. "It wasn't just Titan. We'd been running similar schemes for 3 years, at least 4 other deals. Acquisitions in Texas, California, Illinois, Massachusetts. Inflated projections on all of them. Titan was just the biggest." He met her eyes. "Sterling Industries' entire growth over the past 3 years is partly built on fraud. Total fraudulent inflation, $847 million. The number hung in the smoke-filled air. Victoria felt the world tilt. Not one merger, not one conspiracy. 3 years, 4 deals, nearly $1 billion in systematic deception. Samuel showed her his iPad. Accounting files Derek had been trying to destroy. Excel spreadsheets showing patterns going back 36 months, multiple acquisitions, the full scope of corruption. "Get him out of here," Victoria said quietly. As NYPD officers led Derek away, actually cuffed, now no longer just detained, he tried one more time. "Victoria, I can make this easier. I'll testify against Carter at Manhattan Federal Court, against Moss in Philadelphia, against everyone. Just talk to the prosecutors about immunity." She didn't respond, watched him disappear into the elevator. Henry Morrison emerged from the stairwell, having followed, despite her orders. He saw the destroyed computers. Derek's soot-covered face in the patrol car outside. "How many others?" Victoria's voice sounded hollow in her own ears. "5 total. 2 in our accounting department, 1 at Titan in Philadelphia. Derek will name them all if it saves him from federal prison. Will you recommend immunity? I'll recommend cooperation credit." She stared at the burned servers. "But immunity isn't my decision. The U.S. Attorney for Southern District of New York can decide if his testimony is worth the deal." They stood in silence among the wreckage. Detective James Rodriguez from Midtown South Precinct arrived to take her statement. "How did you first become aware of the fraud?" Victoria thought about Ethan Cooper, about a promise made to a ghost, about a janitor who couldn't ignore systems running in empty spaces. "Our night janitor noticed power consumption inconsistencies. He reported them to security 3 times. I decided to investigate." "A janitor?" She met the detective's skeptical gaze. "A man who keeps promises, who pays attention when everyone else looks away. His name is Ethan Cooper, and he just saved this company from collapse." At 1:30 a.m., Victoria stood in the Sterling Tower lobby, still wearing soot-stained clothes from the FDNY gear. Ethan Cooper appeared near the entrance in his janitor uniform, quiet concern on his weathered features. "Are you all right? I saw fire trucks from Engine 54. Samuel said there was a fire in the mechanical room." She looked at him. This man who'd lost everything and rebuilt himself around a promise, who'd noticed what everyone else had ignored, who'd saved her company twice, once by asking questions, again by giving her a reason to believe integrity still mattered. "I'm fine, but we found more than a fire." She glanced at the NYPD patrol car pulling away, Derek Wilson visible through the window. Ethan followed her gaze. Understanding dawned. "Your CFO?" Victoria nodded, couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. "You tried to warn me," she managed finally. "Asked about systems in empty spaces. If I'd listened sooner." "You listened when it mattered." His voice carried gentle certainty. "That's what counts." Henry Morrison approached, extended his hand to Ethan. "Mr. Cooper, I believe I owe you an apology. And my thanks." Ethan looked uncomfortable with the praise. "Sir, I just noticed things that seemed off. Anyone could have, but no one else did." Henry's voice carried weight earned over 4 decades. "I questioned Victoria's judgment in taking your observations seriously. I was wrong. Because of you, we caught a conspiracy that would have destroyed far more than one merger." Other board members were approaching now, even Margaret Whitmore having rushed from Boston. She spoke grudgingly. "Mr. Cooper, it seems we owe you our company." Victoria's phone rang. Linda Martinez, Grace's babysitter from Queens. The moment she answered, she knew something was wrong. "Ms. Sterling, you need to know reporters found Ethan. They were at PS 234 today." Victoria's stomach dropped. What? They approached Grace directly, outside the school on 21st Avenue. Asked her if her daddy was getting money from Sterling Industries. Asked if he was worried about going to jail like the other executives. She's 6 years old, Ms. Sterling. She came home crying. Victoria looked at Ethan. He was watching her face change, couldn't hear Linda's words, but could read the distress. Grace asked Ethan if he did something wrong. Linda continued, voice tight with anger. If the NYPD were going to take Daddy away, she's terrified. I'll handle this. I'll issue a statement through our PR firm. Get Sullivan and Cromwell legal involved. Linda cut her off. You need to make a choice, Ms. Sterling. Push forward with this oversight position and keep media attention from the New York Post and Daily News on his family. Or let him walk away. Let Grace grow up without being the whistleblower's daughter. Silence. Then Linda delivered the final blow. Ethan will do what he thinks is right, even if it destroys Grace. So you need to be the adult who says, this isn't worth it. You're using his integrity against him. The line went dead. Victoria lowered the phone, met Ethan's eyes across the lobby. He hadn't heard the conversation, but he saw her distress. And suddenly, saving the company felt like the smallest victory in the world, because in Queens, a 6-year-old girl was crying, asking if her father was going to jail, collateral damage in a war she never asked to fight. Victoria took Ethan to her office at 2 a.m., told him everything Linda had said. She watched his face transform horror bleeding into resignation, the look of a man who'd known this risk existed but had hoped against it anyway. Grace asked if I was going to Rikers Island. His voice came out tight. Asked if we'd lose our Queens apartment again. End up back at Pine Street Shelter in Boston. She's 6. She shouldn't understand homelessness or jail or any of this. Victoria's chest ached. I'll issue cease and desist orders through Sullivan and Cromwell. Establish a security detail from Allied Universal for Grace's school. Make it clear Sterling Industries doesn't tolerate harassment of employees' families per New York state law. That'll just make them more interested. Ethan's understanding of media dynamics surprised her. CEO protects janitor whistleblower. That's a front-page story for the New York Post. She paused, made herself say the words. Then I'll withdraw the job offer. You can go back to being invisible. Grace can go back to a normal childhood in Queens. He stared at her. You'd do that? I'd rather lose the oversight position than put a child through trauma. Your daughter's peace matters more than corporate reform. Silence filled the office. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered with indifferent beauty. Finally, Ethan spoke. Linda thinks you're using my integrity against me, that I can't break promises, so you're exploiting that to serve your goals. Victoria felt the accusation land. She's right, I am, and I'm sorry. The honesty seemed to surprise him more than the admission. But I'm giving you a real choice now, she continued. Not guilt, not obligation. If protecting Grace requires walking away, then walk away. I'll support that. Ethan studied her face, searching for deception, finding only exhausted sincerity. I need to go home. Talk to Grace. Of course. They shook hands again. But this time the alliance felt fragile, threatened by forces neither of them could control. After he left, Victoria stood at her window, watched the city breathe through its night rhythms, wondered if saving a company meant destroying a family, wondered if the cost of integrity could ever be too high. Ethan rode the MTA subway home to Astoria, arriving at his rent-stabilized apartment building on 34th Avenue just after 3 a.m. Linda Martinez was waiting in his living room, Grace asleep in her bedroom door, cracked open so they could hear if she woke. Well, Linda's voice carried challenge. Victoria offered to withdraw the job offer, let us disappear back into normal life. Linda's expression softened slightly. And I told her I needed to talk to Grace first. Good. Linda gathered her purse. That child has already lost one parent. Don't let ambition take the other. After she left, Ethan sat in darkness. His small apartment, IKEA furniture, Grace's crayon drawings taped to walls, Sarah's photograph on the shelf, felt both sanctuary and prison. He walked to Grace's room, watched her sleep with the stuffed bunny from Portland clutched against her chest, ribbons tangled in her dark hair. Tomorrow he'd have to explain why reporters had asked those questions, have to decide whether his promise to Sarah justified putting Grace through more fear. Some promises were easier to keep than others. The hard ones were where character lived. The next evening at 10 p.m., Ethan sat on Grace's bed while she wore her Disney princess pajamas. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about what happened at school yesterday." Grace's small voice. "The lady from Channel 7 asked if you were in trouble. Are you Daddy?" "No. Daddy helped fix a problem at work in Manhattan, and sometimes when people fix problems, other people get curious. They ask questions. But she scared me. She said NYPD police might come." "Police won't come for Daddy, I promise." Grace studied his face with 6-year-old intensity. "Is this like your promise to Mommy about helping people who are alone?" Ethan's throat tightened. "Yes. This is part of that promise I made at Evergreen Cemetery. Mrs. Chen at PS 234 says promises are the most important thing, even when they're hard." He hadn't expected this. "What if keeping the promise means scary questions from reporters for you?" Grace considered, then spoke with wisdom that broke his heart. "Then it's still important because Mommy would want you to keep promises." Ethan realized his daughter already understood. She'd watched him rebuild their lives through honoring that cemetery vow, teaching her that promises only counted when convenient would damage her more than temporary media attention. "Daddy, if you stop helping people because someone from Channel 7 asked me questions, does that mean promises only count when they're easy?" The words were his own philosophy reflected back through her innocent clarity. "No, sweetheart. Promises count most when they're hard." "Then you should keep helping at Sterling Tower." Grace reached for his hand. "I'll be brave if you're brave." He pulled her into a hug, felt tears he hadn't shed since Sarah's funeral threatening to surface. His 6-year-old daughter was stronger than he'd given her credit for. In her Upper East Side apartment overlooking Central Park, Victoria sat alone. The space was minimalist, impersonal, no warmth except a single photograph, her with her father James Sterling at the company founding in 1985. She stared at Grace's photo from Ethan's jacket, still on her desk after all these weeks. The internal monologue consumed her. She'd told herself creating oversight was about reform, preventing future fraud on Wall Street, but how much was about proving she was right? Using Ethan's story to justify her choices, she was asking a man to sacrifice his daughter's peace in Queens for her corporate redemption in Manhattan. Her father had taught her to watch people when they thought they were alone. That's when you saw truth. Ethan was that truth, and she was about to destroy it by making him choose between promises and protection. Her phone rang. Ethan calling from Queens. "I talked to Grace. She understands more than I gave her credit for." Victoria's heart accelerated. "What did she say?" "She said promises count most when they're hard." And she's right. Relief and dread mixed in equal measure. "I'll take the position," Ethan continued. "I'll face the committee interview. But I have conditions." "Name them." "If Grace starts having nightmares, or if the attention from the New York Post escalates, or if I see any sign this is damaging her mental health, we're done. No negotiations. My promise to Sarah comes first." "Agreed." Victoria's voice was steady. "And Ethan, I'll protect her. Security detail from Allied Universal. Legal action through Sullivan and Cromwell against media. Whatever it takes." "I'm trusting you with more than my career." His voice carried the weight of everything he'd already lost. "I'm trusting you with my daughter's childhood." "I know." After they hung up, Victoria sat in darkness, made a vow of her own. If she failed Grace Cooper, she'd burn Sterling Industries to the ground herself. Some things mattered more than quarterly earning. The board committee interview took place 1 week later in the Sterling Tower boardroom. Ethan arrived early in a borrowed Navy suit from Men's Warehouse, polished Johnston & Murphy shoes, hair neatly cut, leather folder in hand. 7 board members sat across from a single chair. Deliberate intimidation. Henry Morrison smiled encouragingly. Margaret Whitmore's expression promised no mercy. Margaret opened with an attack. Mr. Cooper, your employment file shows janitorial work, construction labor, and Portland maintenance positions in Brooklyn. What qualifies you for executive oversight? Ethan's voice came calm. I can't answer that by traditional Wall Street measures. No MBA from Wharton or Harvard, no corporate experience, but I understand something credentials don't teach. Which is that numbers on Bloomberg spreadsheets represent real consequences, that power consumption in empty buildings means someone's hiding something, that convenient explanations from MBA graduates deserve skeptical questions. Margaret's dismissal was surgical. That's very poetic, but poetry doesn't qualify someone to oversee billion-dollar operations on NASDAQ. Neither does ignoring fraud because acknowledging it is inconvenient. Ethan met her gaze directly. Your CFO had all the right qualifications, MBA from Wharton, 20 years at Goldman Sachs, glowing references, and he nearly destroyed this company. The room went silent. Another board member tried a different angle. Oversight requires understanding complex financial operations per SEC regulations. How do you propose to evaluate areas without technical expertise? I don't need to understand every detail of derivatives trading to recognize patterns. I don't need accounting credentials from NYU Stern to notice when numbers don't match observable reality. Your technical experts from Deloitte missed the fraud because they were looking at Excel data. I noticed it because I was looking at reality power usage from Con Edison physical evidence in this building. Things that couldn't be rationalized away. Margaret launched her final challenge. You're describing an inherently adversarial role. Someone who questions everything disrupts operations with constant skepticism. Won't that create organizational paralysis and hurt our NASDAQ stock price? I don't think asking questions creates paralysis. Avoiding questions because they're inconvenient creates the rot that eventually collapses structures. Ethan's voice carried conviction earned through tragedy. I've seen it in construction in Portland. Ignore small cracks in foundations, the whole building falls. Ma'am, if you want someone who knows when to look away, when to accept explanations from Wharton graduates that serve immediate interests, you don't want me. I can only promise I'll tell you the truth as I understand it and let you decide what to do with that information. Even if that truth damages the company's position on Wall Street. The truth didn't damage Sterling Industries. The fraud did. I just noticed it before it spread further from Manhattan to Philadelphia to Chicago. Henry Morrison cleared his throat, drew attention away from Margaret's assault. Mr. Cooper, can I ask you something? Ethan nodded. Why did you vote for Ms. Sterling to kill the merger? Why support hiring me for this position? You don't know me. Why take the risk? Henry's expression softened. This was personal. 30 years ago, I was on a different board, manufacturing company in Cleveland, Ohio. His voice carried decades of regret. We had a maintenance supervisor man named Frank Weber. No college degree. Worked with his hands at Republic Steel just like you in Portland. Frank kept telling us the safety protocols weren't being followed. Ventilation systems in the paint shop were failing per OSHA standards. He documented everything, submitted reports, asked for inspections. Henry paused, the pain still fresh after 3 decades. We dismissed him, said he didn't have engineering credentials from Case Western or Ohio State, said his concerns were overstated, said implementing his recommendations would cost too much. His voice cracked slightly. 6 months later, there was an explosion. Paint fumes ignited at the Cleveland plant. 3 workers died in the fire. The room held its breath. OSHA investigation proved Frank was right about everything. The safety failures, the ventilation, the risk assessments, all of it. Henry looked directly at Ethan. We could have prevented those deaths if we'd been willing to listen to someone who noticed things instead of dismissing him because he didn't have degrees from MIT or Carnegie Mellon. I've spent 30 years regretting that I let professional arrogance override honest observation from a working-class man in Cleveland. I won't make that mistake again here in New York. His voice strengthened. I'm voting to give you this chance because I won't be complicit in the kind of failure that kills people, whether literally in explosions in Ohio or figuratively through financial fraud that destroys lives on Wall Street. Ethan spoke quietly. I'm sorry for what happened to Frank and to those workers. So am I. Which is why you matter. Why your observations from cleaning floors in Manhattan matter. Why I'll fight to make sure you're heard. Henry slid a folder across the table. Inside letters of recommendation he'd solicited from construction supervisors who'd worked with Ethan years ago at Turner Construction and Suffolk Construction in Portland. Everyone said the same thing. Ethan Cooper notices details that save lives. I've spent the past week calling board members privately from my Upper East Side home, Henry admitted, convincing them to support this position. The vote won't be narrow luck. It'll be strategic groundwork. Margaret's eyes widened. She'd been outmaneuvered. The committee deliberated with Ethan outside. Margaret objected predictably. Credentials from Wharton or Harvard Business School matter. We can't set precedent that anyone can waltz into executive positions. But he's not anyone, a board member from Connecticut. He demonstrated observational skills our professional auditors from Deloitte lacked. One success in Manhattan doesn't prove ongoing capability. Henry's voice carried finality. One success saved us from $3 billion in fraud and exposed a conspiracy our entire C-suite from Wharton and Goldman missed. That's not luck. That's competence we need to recognize. The vote, 4-3 in favor. Margaret approached Henry in the hallway afterward, grudging respect in her voice. I still think this is a mistake. But if Cooper finds more problems like Derek Wilson, I'll admit I was wrong. My firm Whitmore Consulting depends on Sterling's integrity. That's all I ask. Give him a chance to prove his value. 6 months. If he causes organizational chaos without results, I'm leading the vote to eliminate the position. Henry called Ethan back inside. Mr. Cooper, the committee has voted to offer you the position of Director of Internal Oversight at Sterling Industries, subject to 6-month performance review. Are you willing to accept? I need to talk to my daughter at our Queens apartment first. Make sure Grace understands what this means for our family. Henry's respect deepened. Of course. We'll have the formal offer from Sullivan and Cromwell ready when you've made your decision. That evening, Ethan explained the job to Grace. She listened carefully, then asked the question that mattered. Will you still be home when I wake up for PS 234? Yes, the job means different hours, but I'll always be here in the mornings. Will the reporters from Channel 7 still ask scary questions? Maybe for a little while, but Ms. Sterling promised to protect you. And Daddy will protect you too. Grace considered this. If this helps keep your promise to Mommy at Evergreen Cemetery, then it's okay. The next day, Ethan formally accepted. Victoria announced comprehensive security measures. Plainclothes officers from Allied Universal at PS 234 discreet enough not to scare Grace. Cease and desist letters from Sullivan and Cromwell to every major news outlet. Public statement through PR firm Edelman Ethan Cooper is a regular employee, not a whistleblower seeking publicity. Harassment of his family under New York harassment statutes will result in legal action. Media coaching from crisis management experts. How to handle questions without engaging. 3 months later, Ethan mentioned casually during coffee in Victoria's office. Reporters from the New York Post finally stopped calling. Grace doesn't ask about Rikers anymore. She just asks if I found any problems at work in Manhattan today. Victoria felt relief wash through her. And have you? His slight smile. Always something. They shook hands officially. Contract from Sullivan and Cromwell signed. Position formalized. Henry witnessed via video call from Rockefeller Center. Margaret watched from the doorway, still skeptical but present. An unlikely partnership sealed. The next 3 months became a montage of transformation. Month 1 training. Ethan in conference rooms with financial analysts from J.P. Morgan taking notes on his iPad. Compliance experts from Ernst & Young teaching audit protocols per SEC requirements. Ethan pointing out a loophole in existing Sarbanes-Oxley compliance that made the expert pause and reconsider. Samuel Reeves walking him through the security camera network covering Sterling Tower. Late nights, Ethan still wearing Carhartt work clothes, refusing Brooks Brothers corporate suits, reviewing files in his new office on the 53rd floor. Month 2. First investigation. Ethan noticing discrepancies in Dallas regional office expense reports. American Airlines travel receipts that didn't match calendar dates. Board meeting presentation via Zoom. Investigation confirming $140,000 in overbilling over 18 months by a regional manager. Manager terminated. Systems reformed per Texas and New York corporate law. Month 3 major discovery. Ethan reviewing power consumption data from Con Edison, a new habit checking weekly across all Sterling offices. Pattern in Dallas similar to the original Floor 51 discovery in Manhattan. Remote investigation plus Dallas site visit revealing systematic client overbilling in regional accounting. 2 junior analysts, both SMU graduates, following Derek Wilson's old playbooks learned at Goldman Sachs. Caught before major damage. Only $380,000 in fraudulent billing versus Derek's $847 million across 5 states. Employees arrested by Dallas FBI. Clients refunded. Systems overhauled per SEC requirements. Wall Street Journal headline viewed on iPad. Sterling Industries oversight. Director. Prevents fraud. Cooper's second major catch. Board meeting. Margaret Whitmore speaking grudgingly. I have to admit Cooper's proving more valuable than I expected for Whitmore Consulting's reputation. Stock price chart on Bloomberg Terminal showing Sterling Industries recovered to pre-crisis levels. Victoria watching Ethan through her glass wall managing a team meeting with quiet confidence. CNBC Squawk Box anchor in voiceover. 3 months after hiring a former janitor from Queens as Director of Internal Oversight, Sterling Industries has prevented an estimated $2 million in additional fraud across offices in Manhattan and Dallas. CEO Victoria Sterling's controversial decision is now being called visionary leadership by Harvard Business Review. Competitors from Chicago to Boston are creating similar oversight positions. Vindication spreading beyond one company. Reforms rippling across Wall Street. 1 year later, Friday evening, Victoria's office in Sterling Tower. A knock on her door. Grace Cooper, now 7 taller, still wearing ribbons in her dark hair. She'd taken the MTA subway from PS 234 Queens with Linda Martinez. Security from Allied Universal escorting them up a familiar routine, now no longer frightening. Grace. What a wonderful surprise. What do you have there? The little girl held up a large construction paper drawing made at school. Sterling Tower rendered in crayon. Tall and shiny windows colored like stars, Hudson River visible in the background. At the base of the building, 2 figures, one tall in a business suit carrying a briefcase. Victoria unmistakable with her hair drawn in a neat bun. one shorter holding a mop and flashlight. Ethan in his Carhartt work clothes captured with surprising accuracy for a 7-year-old's art, caption in careful child's handwriting. "Partners keeping the building in New York safe," Grace explained with earnest pride. "Daddy says partners help each other notice things in Manhattan. You notice business problems from Wall Street, he notices building problems. Together you keep everyone safe." Victoria's throat tightened. "That's exactly right. Can I keep this? That's why I made it at PS 234. Daddy says you need reminders that hard things matter." Ethan appeared in the doorway, still in work clothes, Levi's jeans, Sterling Industries polo shirt despite his director title. Some things he refused to change. "Sorry to interrupt, Ms. Sterling. Grace wanted to deliver that in person from Queens." "I'm glad she did." Victoria hung the drawing on her wall, next to her father's photograph from the 1985 founding at the original Brooklyn office. Next to a new edition, a framed quote, "Promises kept matter more than promises made." James Sterling, 1985. The wall now displayed 3 items side by side: past legacy, present partnership, future promise. Ethan cleared his throat. "Speaking of noticing things, I need to talk to you about the Seattle office." Victoria's curiosity sparked. "What about Seattle? Power consumption reports from Seattle City Light don't match occupancy schedules, and the explanations I'm getting from our Washington State office feel too convenient, same language Derek used from Goldman Sachs playbooks." "Another hidden office on the West Coast?" "Maybe. Or maybe legitimate after-hours work at our Amazon Web Services data center contract. But I can't know without investigating." Victoria smiled slightly. "When have I ever asked you to accept convenient explanations? Never. Which is why this partnership from Manhattan to Seattle works." Grace tugged Ethan's hand, ready to head home, chattering about classmates at PS 234 upcoming field trip to the Statue of Liberty, whether they could get pizza on the way back to Queens. Normal childhood concerns. The media attention finally faded to memory. After they left, Victoria stood before her wall of photographs and promises. Thought about her father building this company on integrity. About Derek Wilson corrupting it through rationalized fraud. About Ethan Cooper saving it by refusing to look away. About Grace Cooper growing up watching adults choose between convenience and truth. Some promises were worth keeping, no matter how expensive they became. That truth mattered more than comfort on Wall Street. That one person noticing things from Queens could make a difference if someone else in Manhattan was willing to listen. She picked up her phone, made a call she'd been planning for months. "Henry, it's Victoria. I want to establish a foundation, the James Sterling Memorial Fund for Working Class Oversight. Scholarships and training programs for people like Ethan, individuals without business degrees who demonstrate exceptional observational skills and integrity. I'm allocating $5 million from my personal assets as seed funding." Henry's approval came through clearly. "Your father would be proud." "I hope so." After hanging up, Victoria returned to the window. Below, the city moved through Friday evening rhythms. Workers streaming toward subway stations. Lights beginning to glow in office towers. The perpetual motion of ambition and survival. Wide shot of Sterling Tower at sunset. Lights coming on floor by floor. Empire State Building visible in the distance. Camera finding Ethan's office on the 53rd floor, the same floor where he once cleaned conference rooms in darkness. He sat at his desk reviewing Seattle reports on a laptop. Grace's drawing visible on his wall, too. A photograph beside it, Sarah and Grace at Old Orchard Beach, the same image from his jacket pocket a year ago. No longer hidden, no longer carried alone. The memory honored. The promise kept. The future secured. Zoom out to full tower. Manhattan skyline beyond Hudson River, New Jersey. Lights, One World Trade Center piercing the night. Victoria's voice in final narration quiet and certain. The tower's light stayed on through the night, watching over a city that never slept, protecting promises that would outlast any of them. Fade to black on the New York skyline. The story complete.